fish as a principle really helped me stay alive during a really difficult period in my life, which was during the process of unfortunately losing my wife to cancer. There were days when it was a struggle to get out of bed and cook for my boys. I would give myself a score out of 10 on fulfillment, inspiration, success, and happiness. As long as my life felt like it was getting a little bit better, I kept going.
Chris, thank you very much for joining me on Success Matters podcast. You've written a book called, well, basically you've not just written a book, you've got a whole kind of philosophy built around something called fish. Could you explain to us what fish is and what it means?
Sure. So I wrote fish. I started writing about fish in a LinkedIn post, and I wrote about fulfillment, inspirations. Or I wrote about fulfillment, success, and happiness. And I realized that I was one letter away from fish. And so I created fulfillment, inspiration, success, and happiness. And that's how it came about. But it means a lot to me because fish as a principle really helped me stay alive during a really difficult period in my life, which was during the process of unfortunately losing my wife to cancer.
Right. Okay. All right. So it was something that you had and in your mind as a sort of principle, but as you say, you lost your wife to cancer. When that happened, how did the fish principle, fish philosophy, how did that help support you as you were going through that?
So I started a process of journaling, and I would score myself out of 10 on every given day. I would give myself a score out of 10 on fulfillment, inspiration, success, and happiness. And I really was using fish to measure, in the deepest grief that I was experiencing, I used it to measure whether my life was getting better or worse. Okay. And as long as my life felt like it was getting a little bit better, I kept going.
Right.
And so my daily score was, during that dark period of my life, was consistently over the course of a week or a month, my scores were growing, not decreasing. So I knew I was getting stronger and life was getting better. So it was an objective measure of how I was experiencing life.
Okay. And so did you create like a little wall chart where you were tracking this, or how did you track the changing in the scores of that?
So it was a journal. So I kept multiple journals, and the score was at the top of every page. And on a given day, I would score myself out of 10 for my fish score, but I would also record what I was grateful for that day. And so I had a recording in memory of my most grateful moments of every day and why I gave myself a certain score on my fish score. So I could go back and I could explain why my happiness score was a 7 that day, for example. There was reason in my gratitude journal. And so I've got those journals in my library at home, and I have referred back to them. Mostly when I was writing The Joy of Finding Fish, I've referred back to my journals for my own case studies. Right.
Yeah. And there's something about that, isn't there, where you look back on something like a journal entry a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years later, and it triggers a happy memory, and it just helps to kind of put things into perspective, even though you were going through a very tough time at the time that you started this. Were you journaling whilst and using the fish score whilst your wife was when she was diagnosed and as she was going through her care, or was it after she passed that you started to do this?
It was actually after she passed. I didn't have the bandwidth when she was ill, and I was her primary carer. I didn't have the time or the bandwidth to commit to the fish process.
Right.
And it was only in recovery. Well, it was only in entering into grief for Fiona that I was able to take a step back and go, okay, I need something. I need a safety net, and the fish score became part of my safety net.
Right. Okay. So how did you enter into this world of looking at, I suppose, building on your strengths and mindfulness and all of those aspects? Because I know you live in New Zealand. You've got a North American accent. So did your travels bring you to this kind of point in time where this was the thing you wanted to do?
Yeah, I suppose it was quite gradual. I mean, I grew up in Canada and I did a couple of degrees. And then when I graduated, I moved to the UK and I lived in London and Brighton. And during that time, I met my wife, who was Scottish, and she was living in Edinburgh. So before long, I moved from Brighton to Edinburgh, and then we moved through to Glasgow together. And I had I had a pharmaceutical management career for 12 years in the UK. And at the end of that career, I was put on a coaching course, and I fell in love with the idea of coaching. And it gave me an opportunity to change my career. And when my wife and I immigrated from Scotland to New Zealand, I did some more training as a coach. I joined a business coaching company in Wellington, and I coached small business owners for 3 years. And then I became a corporate and executive coach for Gallup, who are a large management consulting firm, and they're quite famous for strengths philosophy. And so I integrated strengths philosophy into my normal coaching toolkit, if you like. And I was with Gallup for 7 years as their senior consultant in New Zealand. And then because Gallup largely served big corporates and big government departments, I kind of felt a need to reconnect with small business. And so I left Gallup to set up my own coaching and mentoring practice. And I've been doing that for the last 7 years, integrating strengths, fish, mindfulness, entrepreneurial mindset. There's lots that I coach.
Right. Okay. So as part of that time at the pharmaceutical company, the coaching thing is the coaching training that you did was the hook that actually brought you to where you are today. That was the initial, I suppose, introduction into this world, and you fell in love with it at that point.
Yeah. I when I went on the coaching course, I kind of had this realization that I've always been a good communicator, and I've always been good at rapport, and I've always been good at communication. But the structure and the power and the value of coaching became really obvious during that course. And I just thought I could make a career of this. I don't need to be a pharmaceutical marketeer anymore. I can actually make money by being a great coach and a great communicator. And that really appealed to me. So it was at the time, my wife and I talked about me re-entering the pharmaceutical world in New Zealand, but for a whole bunch of reasons that didn't feel like the right thing to do. And I found a great business coaching company to join, and I learned a lot by being with them.
Right. Okay. And you touched on strengths there as well, which is, as we know, as you said, it's a very famous Gallup brand as well as actual capability. How is strengths incorporated into fish and into the other work that you do?
So my first book was all about kind of core coaching principles. It was about core purpose, core values, life roles, pursuing your greatest imaginable challenge. And the last 5 chapters, which were written after my wife passed away, so the first 8 chapters were written before she died, and then the last 5 were written after she passed away. They're about love and resilience and gratitude, and they're much more emotional. Like it was a download for me to actually get them onto the page. And it was although I touched on strengths wasn't the core purpose of the first book. Whereas my second book is called Finding Fish in a Strength-Based Practice, and it's explicitly about integrating fish and strength. So my philosophy or my hypothesis in building a strength-based practice is that if you lean into your strengths and do what you love to do, then you have a much greater chance of experiencing fulfillment, inspiration, success, and happiness. And so chapters of my second book outline processes that a strength-based practice owner can follow that has a huge potential to lift their fish score.
Okay. So someone is listening into this and doesn't really know what strengths is in terms of, the conceptual framework around it. Could you just explain a little bit about that and how people would go about finding their strengths? Because often, I think people might think of their strengths as one thing, but actually the whole Gallup strengths process is often something a little bit different to what people may be thinking.
Yeah, so it was interesting when I did my research for my second book. I wrote a chapter on the introduction to strengths. And in that chapter, I previewed 7 different strengths tools, of which Clifton Strengths is my favorite and the one I'm most familiar with. But all strengths tools try to empower an individual and inform an individual objectively of what they are good at. What is their preference? What do they love to do most? So there's a combination of what am I likely to enjoy and what am I likely to be excellent at? And it's at the combination of those that you have your strengths language. So each of the 7 tools has a different language to describe your talent or your strengths. But Clifton Strengths is quite clinical. It's quite scientific. It's been studied and researched for 30, 40 years. And so there's a robustness to Gallup's Clifton Strengths language that I really appreciate and that I really like and value. And the philosophy is, how do I help you? If you were my client, how would I help you lean into your strengths and not worry so much about your weaknesses? Be aware of your weaknesses, but really play to your strengths. How do you overwhelm a weakness with a strength?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I, as your strengths coach, help you with the language that describes your top 10 themes or your top 15 themes that again show up every day for you, but sometimes it takes a coach to highlight how it's showing up in your family life or in your work life or in any situation that it might be valuable.
Yeah. I was just reminded as you were talking there about strengths versus weaknesses that I think there's a natural tendency for us to focus on our weaknesses. And I do wonder if this is because of when we're growing up, when you're learning and you handed a piece of work to your teacher for marking and the teacher gives you your grade and then might say, oh, you got these 5 questions wrong. You spend a lot of time trying to work out why you got those 5 questions wrong without thinking about the 20 that you got right. And so you're almost conditioning yourself to look at what's not quite right and trying to fix that rather than building on what is right. And I don't know if there's anything in that. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But it's just sort of, as you were talking, I just thought that could be part of why we focus on that and don't always think about the strengths and how to use those.
Well, and I think there's a real opportunity, and it's already starting to happen. There's a real opportunity to change education and to change parenting.
Mm-hmm.
So what if, for example, your child loved music and English and was really good at them, but was average or below average at math and science? What if instead of giving them more time at a tutor for math and science, you actually gave them more time on music and English? So that they were loving so they got more time to do what they love and got even better at what they're already really good at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to be average or below average in the subjects that aren't your areas of strength. So there's a philosophical change that my wife and I certainly applied in our relationship with our 2 sons, who are now 20 and 15. So we were very good at noticing what they enjoy most and what they are really good at and not worrying so much about what they were not so good at.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And of course, if you're doing things, back to what you said earlier, that you enjoy and that you're good at, then you're going to get your fulfillment. You're going to feel inspired. You're going to feel successful and you're going to feel happy, right? So the fish principle applied. There you go. It's like perfect. So when you said you wrote the book, and the book is kind of in two halves because the initial half was being written before your wife passed, and then the other half was after. So is the first half really more around, I suppose, the technical aspects of it, and the second half, as you say, more the emotional aspects of the fish philosophy?
How do I? The first half is tangible, practical ways to improve your life. So
Right.
if you haven't thought about your core purpose, here are some coaching questions to think about your core purpose. If you haven't elaborated on your core values, here are some questions to really reflect on your core values. And I draw conclusions that says core purpose, core values, life roles, greatest imaginable challenge all contribute to your fish score. So your experience of fish comes through some of these coaching tools or being aware of some of these coaching philosophies. Whereas the last 5 chapters were more about how I used fish to survive a trauma. Right. So it was a practical example of how did I go to a basketball game with my sons 5 days after my wife died and watch them play, and it was them playing basketball, right?
Right.
How did we do that as a family from a resilience point of view? And I talk about experiencing fish in the little moments that gave you hope, that gave me hope, right? A little fish moment that gave me hope was enough to get me to the next day.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Understood. And that's very, very important when you're grieving, particularly when you're grieving, right? It's very easy to end up in a downward spiral. And so finding those little moments of hope are very important. And so it's great that you started to apply your own kind of philosophy to what you were doing. So as you know, Christopher, this is called Success Matters. And so I always ask all my guests, what would you say success means to you?
It's a great question. I love the fact that the fish philosophy is 4 elements and that success is only one of those 4 elements. So success for me is in perspective of the other 3 fish elements. And the other thing that I've realized over time, I mean, there were days when it was a struggle to get out of bed and cook for my boys. And so success is relative. Success on a day when life is really, really hard could be as simple as being able to take a shower and get up and start your day, right? That might be the pinnacle of success. And success can be very grand. I've written 2 books. I've published 2 websites. I've published a card game. Like, there are some things I'm really proud of in my career, really proud of, and they are big and significant. But there are days I can remember in the survival post losing Fiona that I was just really proud that I got through the day. Yeah, and that was as big a success as any of the books I've published.
Yeah, and that's such an important point, because success to us, we're fed a view of success, but there's people in different parts of the life journey. And as you say, just getting out of bed, getting ready for the day ahead for many people is, that's the first step in success. So I really like the way you've got the fulfillment and the inspiration as part of it, and the happiness, because that whole piece coming together is so important. I do ask previous guests for a question for my next guest, and my previous guest asked a question which I have to paraphrase here. So she asked the question, she said, in this world where we're moving more to a sort of genderless kind of society, where the boundaries between sort of men and women are getting blurred, and there's a lot more grey areas, how does that drive towards equality, and then how does that drive towards success?
It's another great question. I love building relationships based on trust and mutual respect.
Mm-hmm.
And mutual respect especially is for the talent that we are surrounded by. So I don't care about gender or sexual preference or disability or anything that someone might define or label themselves as. I'm more interested in their core talent. What are they really good at, and what do they love to do in life? And how does that level the playing field, right? I think for a long time, the playing field hasn't been level because certain talents have been appreciated more than others. Right. And I think what's emerging, or what I feel is changing, is that whether you're a working mom or whether you have neurodiversity or whether you are, it kind of doesn't matter who you are. There's an opportunity now for genuine talent to be appreciated and for people to become the best version of themselves by growing into, whether it be a role or self-employment or parenting or kind of whatever they want to apply themselves to. It's the individual appreciating their own strengths and it being obvious to others. So I really appreciate you because of your talent as a communicator, right? And for people to notice that and for that to be built upon for a future career or life.
Right. Okay. So where this question was coming from is that my previous guest is she won something called Miss Generation, and it's a kind of beauty pageant, but not necessarily about being the most glamorous in the world, but actually really to help women find their inner femininity and have that inner beauty shine through. So from her perspective, she was thinking, well, okay, if that's a world that I enjoy, then how does the sort of drive towards mixing the genders and all of that work? So that was the context of the question that she asked, and I found it very interesting, the conversation that we had at that point. I really like your answer there as well, which is, you know what, it doesn't matter. It's, let's play to, as we said earlier, play to people's strengths, right? They've got capability to do things. Let's celebrate those talents that they have, and let's amplify them and not worry about what gender kind of they sit in. And so thank you very much for that. Do you have a question for my next guest?
Yeah, I've developed a real passion in the last year for heart-centered leadership and love and compassion. And what I would love to hear is if we could exponentially expand love on the planet at this time, how would we do it?
Okay. If we could exponentially expand love on this planet, how would we do it? That's an interesting question. Do you have any thoughts on how we would do it?
So I'm starting with myself. I've got a plan to attempt to double the love in my life every year until I die. Now, I've only started this year.
Okay.
No, I don't know how realistic that is or what that looks like, but a lot of it comes down to my capacity to give love. So it is not about how much love I receive. It's very much about how much I'm giving to the world and giving to my sons and giving to my practice team and giving to my clients and giving to my extended family who live in Scotland and Canada. So my capacity for experiencing more love is only limited by my willingness to give love. That's my hypothesis. I'm going to see what happens in the next few years as to whether I can keep growing the amount of love in my life.
Okay. And in what form does that love take?
Some of it is as straightforward as telling the people that are close to you that you love them.
Mm-hmm.
But in a working context, it's more along the lines of generosity of compliments, noticing the exceptional talent of the people around you and complimenting that. Kindness, day-to-day kindness. So basics of thank yous and feeling grateful for the people around you and the experiences that you're having. I think there's lots of different ways you can explore love. One of the things that I developed in the last year, and I just launched it on July 1st, was my Let's Talk Love playing cards. And Let's Talk Love playing cards are designed to build meaningful conversations about fulfillment, inspiration, success, and happiness to feel more love. And so it's a deck of about 70 cards. Half of them are love cards. The other half are fish cards. And it's like a conversation question game that you ask in a group, either in a group context, or you can self-administer and just experience it yourself. But by the end of it, your awareness of love, if not your experience of love, should have climbed.
Right. Okay. And so with heart-based leadership, oftentimes leaders feel that they have to be a certain type of person, and maybe this kind of, giving compliments and that sort of aspect may not sit right with their thoughts of how they need to be a leader. So how do you coach someone towards maybe changing a mindset around what it means to be a leader versus a heart-based leader?
So one of the best pieces of research that Gallup ever did was called the 4 Needs of Followers. And they did research on over 10,000 followers around the world, and they asked those followers, what do you expect from your leaders? And then they took the responses and they coded it and themed it, and it all came back to four specific needs, which are hope, trust, stability, and compassion. Now, heart-centered leadership sits in compassion. So I'm not under any illusion that everybody can be a great heart-centered leader. That may not be a natural fit for some style of leaders. But you've got to find your need of followers that you're going to be good at. If you're not fulfilling hope, trust, stability, or compassion, you probably shouldn't be leading.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I suppose trust also fits within that heart-based leadership, because if you don't trust them, then you're not going to make that heart-based connection, right? Or as a follower or as a leader. So I would maybe think trust is part of that heart-based package.
Yes, it certainly can be. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Christopher, it's been a great conversation. We're kind of coming up to the top of our time now. If people want to find out more about the work you do, the books that you've written, the cards that you've got, what's the best way for them to contact you, and what's the best way for them to find out more?
So probably the easiest way is through my website, which is christopher-miller.com. Mm-hmm. And there's a publications page that outlines both my books and the card deck. Both of my books are available for free download on my website.
Okay.
And I can send signed copies if people order them physically. The other site that would be worth looking at for people would be a site I just launched on August 1st, which is expansive.love. And expansive.love outlines the beginnings of my vision for lifting love on the planet. And it goes some way to answer the question that I asked earlier on this call.
Right.
So Christopher-Miller.com and expansive.love. You can find all my contact details on both those sites.
Okay. So expansive.love is, as you say, you've just launched it. If we can, each of us, increase each year the amount of love we're giving, doubling it each time, then we could hit the target, right, of doubling love around the world pretty quickly as a result of that.
I think we could, but it needs to become an intentional movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, certainly I will be promoting it and talking about it to everyone that I meet, because I think it's a very important aspect, particularly in today's world where a lot of people maybe aren't feeling the love, and the hope has gone for a lot of people. So I shall certainly be putting that out there, and especially the fish philosophy. it's so simple. The model is so simple in the way in which you've just described it, the whole aspects of it, and yet it's so deep and so, intrinsically motivating. So I'm going to be borrowing some of those elements in my conversations with other people as well, Christopher. So thank you very much for your time. It's been a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to seeing how your path and journey and how we find more fish and more aspects of hope and love in the world as we go through the next 12, 24 months.
Great. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I feel cautiously optimistic about the future. I know the world looks in a very weird place at the moment, but if you look for signs of hope, they're there, and you just need to lean into them.
Yeah, absolutely. Those looking for those, as you say, signs of hope, those positive elements, the things that bring fulfillment, basically everything we talked about already, that's gonna make the world a better place. So thanks once again, Christopher. It's been a great conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks, Sanjay.
To find your success, contact me at info@successmatterscoaching.com. That's info@successmatterscoaching.com.